baby looks up at him and he just melts, right?
Right.
So somehow or another, he doesn't have emotional management necessarily to the degree we're talking about it, but his heart can trigger anyway. The intelligence of his heart or the feelings of the heart can override some of that. So I think that emotional management done well is born from the intelligence of the heart. But once we get some emotional management, then it's easier to access the intelligence of the heart. It's easier to begin to see that this is a good thing to do.
God, I wish emotional management was a course beginning in the youngest of children. You know,
well, there's some resources on the HeartMath.org site. Some of them are free for people that are listening that relate to that. You can get for kids, and some of them are very, very inexpensive. There's a little book. Doc Schulte's first book was for teenagers. The How-To Guide of Teen Self-Discovery, it was called. And there are a variety of resources there for children that people can get from going to the HeartMath.org site. A lot of the training stuff, the M-Wave technology, the coherence building technology, a lot of that's on the HeartMath.com site. Information about Heart Mastery, the training program I talked about earlier, where people all around the world are taking that now, going through a whole process where they can take courses for over a year learning Heart Math. So there's different ways we get it out to people, but the work we do with youth and with children and school systems, things like that comes through our nonprofit.
I also loved reading about your work with police. I want you to talk a little bit about David MacArthur, the former Attorney General whose wife was murdered, and how he dealt with the situation. I thought that was really profound.
Yeah, it's a compelling story. I mean, with David's story, David is a friend of mine, a man I've known now for close to 20 years, and a man I admire greatly. And he worked for HeartMath for a while. He basically, when I met him, he was a minister within the Unity Church context. And he came away from the Unity Church ministerial roles for a while, worked here at HeartMath for a few years, and now he's back. He's a minister at Unity Church again. What he did in regards to his forgiveness happened before HeartMath, but it speaks to me why I put it in the book, because I was writing a chapter on forgiveness. And the story is real. It comes from somebody that I know, and it demonstrates the power of the heart to overcome almost anything and to have the ability to forgive in ways that we often think we can't. In his case, he was married. He was the Assistant Attorney General in New Mexico. He took in a relative, a young man who was having some problems. He took him into his home to help him. Short story: as he came home from work one day and found his wife had been murdered, then they found out that the person that murdered him was the boy they'd taken into his home. David was a public figure. They took the boy to jail. There was an outcry, about this whole thing, and they really wanted to see this boy get the death penalty and all that. And David, being a lawyer, decided differently. And the first thing that he did is he went and he forgave the boy, and he had the forgiveness with him about what had happened. And then he went and did everything that he could so that the boy would not be tried as a criminal, tried and given a death sentence, that he was given mental health treatment and put into a mental institute instead. And he did all that. And this was the same person that had murdered his wife. I found that a compelling story, and it showed that the power of love, the power of the heart, can transcend the things that we could consider almost unimaginable. But David has that kind of heart, and he was able to manifest that and make that happen in his life. So I thought it was a relevant story in the context of forgiveness.
That's pretty profound.
Yeah.
It's almost like Mother Teresa level forgiveness, because when a family member is taken, there's a primal thing that gets triggered. And even to be able to transcend that is pretty profound.
Yeah, you bet. And again, a man that I know, so I felt like it wasn't just me reporting on a story I read in a magazine somewhere. It was, a real story from a real person that's been part of my life. And forgiveness was a tricky chapter to write, because forgiveness is hard. It's one of the hardest things to do, and I said that in the chapter. And,
right.
I don't even talk about forgiveness much in the public presentations I do. When I speak around the world, it's a subject that I very rarely go into.
Because it's so taboo.
Well, it's tough to people, it's like it's hard to, get to that forgiveness place. But, I talk about it a lot in the book, and I talk about, degrees of forgiveness too, conditional forgiveness, for example, when we forgive to a certain degree, or we have the thoughts of like, well, I forgive him, damn if I ever want to see him again, which kind of says there's a partial forgiveness there, but not one that's complete and whole. So it takes a lot of work sometimes to get to forgiveness when we feel we've been wronged. And I also make the point in the book about forgiveness that it's about giving people latitude, recognizing that people often are doing what they think's right or the best thing they can do. And one of the things that Doc Childry, who co-authored the book with me, I remember a thing that he added to it was fantastic when he said was, if you were in a seminar somewhere and they had you doing an exercise, writing a list of people or situations or whatever that you needed to forgive, just realize that somebody else that could be in a seminar someplace else and your name could be on their list.
Absolutely.
I sort of put it in context pretty clearly that we can give it and we can also receive it.
On page 19, you talked about appreciation, non-judgment, forgiveness, and care, which activate core feelings. Do you think that all these realms, appreciation, non-judgment, forgiveness, and care, help build more heart coherence or more maturity? What do you think?
They're the foundational pieces of the emotional aspect of heart intelligence. And I remember a night when I was with Doc Childry, our founder, and he was hanging out with us, talking myself and a few more. We were hanging, having a good time. But he was talking about love, and there was a table sitting there. And he looked at the table and said, "Let me explain this to you." He said, "Love is like the top of this table." He said, "But love has got all kinds of different angles and different aspects to it. It's a word that covers a lot of territory." He said, "You can look at the things that make up love, like the legs on this table." And he said, things like care, appreciation, forgiveness, non-judgment. They're all aspects of love when you start breaking love down. And so, that they're aspects of heart intelligence. They're sort of, we have this physical intelligence we've talked about earlier in the program. We've also got an emotional heart, which is where, to me, we feel and where we source a lot of these emotions from, like the ones we've just mentioned. And they're the ones that seem to be the most rewarding, the ones that give us the most fulfillment. And so, there are aspects of it as we cultivate these things more. And in the HeartMath Solution, I have a whole chapter on care, followed by a chapter on what we call overcare, which is when care crosses a line and becomes basically a burdensome sense of responsibility. So there's a lot about those things in the HeartMath Solution. As Doc and I broke down these understandings of things like care and appreciation, and hopefully gave them new understanding, because they've been talked about a lot by a lot of other people for a long time. We tried to bring some of the understandings that we've had to it, and a lot of that's Doc. I mean, he's amazing intelligence, and it certainly taught me an awful lot about all these things.
I want you to share a little bit about how heart intelligence has increased the levels of hormones, like, for example, doubled the DHEA in somebody's body, and even how it transcended what they were taking in terms of supplemental DHEA, how it lowered cortisol, which you talked about. But I thought that was very interesting.
DHEA is a hormone that's been called the anti-aging or vitality hormone. There's another hormone that relates to it. It's called cortisol. Cortisol is actually called the stress hormone. And the relationship between those two is that they're both produced by another hormone called pregnenolone. So think of pregnenolone as the mother hormone. It's producing both cortisol and DHEA. So there's a relationship in cortisol-DHEA balance is one of the ways that people that look at health through hormones begin to determine some things about the physical health of a person. So we did a study looking at those two hormones and their relationship. We had 28 participants, 14 men, 14 women. They were brought to HeartMath. They were tested first. The baselines were taking readings on their DHEA and their cortisol. Then they were trained for a day, and they were trained in HeartMath techniques, many of the ones that are found in our publications like HeartMath Solution.
Right.
They were doing heart lock-ins. They were doing, the cut-through technique. What they didn't have back then was the M-Wave technology, which is the coherence-building technology. That wasn't created yet, but they had the techniques. So they weren't allowed for 1 month to make any changes in lifestyle, diet, and those kind of things. At the end of 1 month, we brought them back. We took readings again on DHEA and cortisol. Both the pre-training and post-training samples were sent off to a lab in Seattle, just where a lab analysis place in Seattle. And then after we sent the post samples, the director of research at Institute of Heartmath, Dr. Roland McCready, received a call from the owner of the lab in Seattle, who had a question. He said, we've been analyzing these samples and we see a very significant shift in the DHEA cortisol readings. I'd like to know, what these people are taking. And Roland said, they're not taking anything. This is all being done through behavioral change process using heart-focused, heart-based techniques. The man was astounded. what we saw is that within that group of people, there was actually a